The Black Hawk shook in the storm air, its blades hammering against the night sky with a violence that seemed to rattle bone and blood as much as metal. Riley sat braced against the fuselage, one hand wrapped tight around the thick rope coiled beside her. The torn leather of her gloves bit into her palm, wet and tacky where rain had already seeped through the seams. Sweat ran from beneath her helmet and down her jaw, mixing with the fine mist that pushed through the open door, and her braid clung stubbornly to the side of her neck, plastered in place by heat and rain. The team was silent, each man and woman an unyielding silhouette beneath their battered Ops Corps helmets, faces hidden behind straps and shadows. Their world was a cocoon of steel and thunder, but the ritual of preparation moved as if rehearsed 1,000 times. Fingers checked magazines, tugged straps, clipped carabiners, pressed down on buckles with deliberate finality. Riley ran her thumb over the suppressor threaded to her HK-416, feeling the subtle ridges in the metal, the promise of quiet violence when the moment came. This, too, was ritual checking the weapon not because it was unready, but because readiness was the only shield against chaos. Through the open door, the jungle loomed like a green ocean at midnight, the canopy shuddering under sheets of rain. It was vast and unbroken, stretching in every direction like the endless surface of some waiting sea, no landing zone below, no clearings to be seen. The only way in was down ropes into a world that swallowed light and sound whole. Riley stared at it with the quiet dread of someone about to step inside the mouth of a predator. Her goggles fogged as she breathed into the stale air of the bird. She wiped them absently with the back of her glove, smearing more mud than she cleared, and left them pushed up above her brow for the moment. A muted nod from the crew chief came, 2 fingers raised, signaling 2 minutes to rope. The pilot's voice crackled over comms, nearly drowned by rotor wash winds cross. Visibility low. Hold fast. No one replied. There was nothing to say. One by one, the seals rose into crouched positions, boots spread for balance as the bird lurched against turbulence. Riley felt her chest tighten, not with fear but with focus, her breathing falling into the clipped rhythm she had taught herself years ago. Inhale steady, exhale shorter. Repeat until every tremor dulled into control. She glanced at the rope coiled at her side, the lifeline between the steel certainty of the Black Hawk and the unknowable jungle floor. Her gloves were already bleeding fibers where rope burn had torn them raw on previous missions. She flexed her fingers, as if reminding them they would need to endure again. The jungle surged closer, the canopy blurred beneath them into heaving green shapes bent sideways by rotor wash, branches cracking like bones under pressure. Shadows bent strangely in the flashing strobes of lightning, vines curling upward as though reaching, grasping for the bird that dared hover above. Riley thought of the place not as terrain, but as an organism, alive and patient, a predator waiting for them to descend into its belly. The moment came with a sudden cut of gesture. The crew chief swung his arm down, rope spilled into darkness, whipping under rotor blast. Riley moved second in the line, her rifle slung across her chest, boots planted on the skid. The wind lashed her braid across her cheek, stung her eyes with rain, but she didn't blink. Her hands closed on the rope with bruising force, leather tearing under strain. She leaned back, felt the earth's pull, and slid into the night. The descent was a blur of wet rope, burning friction, and breath muffled inside Com's headset. Below, the green ocean swelled upward, unbroken until she hit the canopy with a rush of branches and leaves. They tore at her plate carrier, clawed her face, snapped against her helmet. Her rifle banged against her chest as she forced her body down through tangles of wood and vine, dropping like a stone into an alien sea. The last few meters ended with boots sinking into mud, the ground soft and sucking, water spraying up to her knees. And then there was silence. The Black Hawk thundered above for a moment longer, then banked away, swallowed by storm and distance. Rotor wash died into dripping leaves. The sudden vacuum of sound pressed down with a weight heavier than steel. Riley felt her chest tighten again, not from exertion, but from the overwhelming stillness, broken only by the relentless hiss of rain and the drone of insects rising like static. Her goggles fogged instantly in the humidity. She slid them down anyway, vision blurred with streaks of condensation, but the gesture was less for clarity than discipline. Around her, the team appeared in pieces, one figure at a time pushing through the branches, shapes that melted into darkness as fast as they emerged. No faces, only shadows. Weapons raised, heads on a swivel, each movement purposeful and quiet. Riley crouched low, boots sinking into black soil, listening. The jungle gave them nothing but its own voice. Drops rattled on wide leaves overhead and fell in heavy rhythms, 100 tiny drums marking time. Insects buzzed louder than her heartbeat, louder than her breathing, louder than the memory of the Black Hawk. Every sound carried weight, every echo a threat. She adjusted her rifle, suppressor angled into darkness, promise of silence ready at her hands. She thought of the rope they had just abandoned above the canopy, a lifeline still swaying in wind and storm, useless now, cut off from them by distance and decision. Behind them was no retreat, only forward. Her torn gloves itched with rope burns, the emblems of endurance she would carry deeper into this green abyss. She lifted one hand, fingers closed into a fist. The squad stilled. Not a boot shifted. Not a breath betrayed their presence. Riley stared ahead into the wall of green, her braid dripping rain into the mud, her eyes catching the shadows where no light reached. She did not see the enemy. She did not see the pilot they were sent to rescue. She only saw the jungle, vast, unbroken, endless, and in it, she felt the certainty that every step forward was trespass into a realm that demanded silence and respect. This was not just insertion. It was entry into a place that would resist them with every drop of rain, every biting insect, every vine coiled like a noose. Riley felt it watching, waiting, alive. She tightened her grip on her rifle, breath slow and steady, and signaled the team forward into the dark. The jungle pressed in on them with every step, a living wall of green that yielded only by force. The machete swung ahead of Riley in controlled arcs, cutting a narrow tunnel through vines that snapped back with wet lashes. Every strike was a betrayal of presence, the metallic whisper of blade against foliage echoing like a gunshot in the suffocating silence. She hated the sound, hated the way it announced them to the trees and whatever listened beyond. Still, there was no other way forward. Humidity thickened the air into something closer to water than breath. It poured down the inside of Riley's helmet, soaked into her braid until it felt like a rope dragging at her neck. Her goggles, already streaked and fogged, blurred the green into shifting patterns of shadow. She slid them up, wiped them with the back of a torn glove, and only made the view muddier with streaks of mud and sweat. For a moment she wondered if the jungle itself wanted to blind her, to strip away every sense but sound. The seals moved in file, boots sinking into mud that sucked at every step. Roots lay in wait like coiled traps, slick with moss, snagging legs and forcing sudden stumbles. Leeches clung fast, black smears that appeared and multiplied no matter how often they were stripped away. The team ignored them. The jungle always took its toll. Blood, sweat, silence, payment for trespass. Technology offered no reprieve. Riley glanced at her wrist-mounted GPS, the screen flashing uselessly, the signal stifled beneath layers of canopy. The map had already proven worthless, drawn lines that meant nothing under the thick crown of trees. Radios fizzed with static when tested, bursts of sound swallowed in seconds by the humidity and foliage. Here, instinct was the only compass. Instinct and silence. She raised a fist. The file froze instantly, rifles angled outward, bodies pressed low among roots and broad ferns. Riley crouched and touched the mud where water pooled in a shallow depression. Fresh tracks cut across it, boot tread, heavy, still sharp against the surface. She brushed her glove across the print and lifted damp earth, rubbing it between her fingers. Not hours old, minutes. Her breath slowed, ears straining. At first it was only the ceaseless drone of insects, their buzzing louder than her own heartbeat. But beneath it, faint, carried on the wet air voices. Low, foreign, punctuated by the chop of machetes against wood. Enemy patrol. Close. She signaled with 2 fingers, pointing to her ear, then forward, the line compressed, seals sliding into cover with the fluidity of habit. Each man and woman became part of the forest pressed against tree trunks, crouched in shadows, rifles fixed on empty green. Their helmets gleamed with rivulets of rain, each drop dripping endlessly off the rim, tiny rivers falling into the dirt. Silence stretched until even the jungle seemed to pause. Riley pressed her back against a trunk, HK-416 cradled against her chest. The wood was slick, damp with age and moss, but it grounded her in place. Her torn gloves itched, the rope burns reopening where friction met sweat, but she didn't adjust. She let the discomfort hold her still. She closed her eyes briefly, mapping the sounds 1 patrol, maybe half a dozen, moving parallel. Not yet aware, not yet hunting her team directly, but close enough that 1 misstep would be the end of silence. The machete at her side felt like a liability now, a tool turned risk, each strike capable of undoing them. It had carved their path, but it had also carved their signature into the jungle's skin. She thought of the footprints she had found, the mirror of their own intrusion. They were not alone in cutting paths. They were being mirrored, hunted as they hunted. The enemy voices swelled, then receded, drifting sideways through the canopy. Riley watched as the seals remained motionless, faces invisible behind goggles streaked with water, forms indistinguishable from the trees themselves. Their discipline was absolute. No one shifted. No one exhaled louder than a whisper. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The insects filled the silence, their collective buzz rising like a warning siren. Rain pattered steadily, dripping from leaf to leaf, hitting helmets, soaking uniforms until fabric clung like second skin. Each drop felt amplified, each sound magnified. The jungle itself amplified and twisted everything. Machetes slicing, voices carried, silence bending until it threatened to shatter. Finally, the voices faded into distance. Riley opened her eyes, glanced back along the line. She could see the strain in posture, the taut readiness of soldiers who had become shadows. She held them still longer, testing the silence, waiting until even the insects seemed to accept their presence again. Only then did she ease her hand down and signal to move. They pressed forward at half the pace, machetes used sparingly, blades biting only when no other route remained. Riley's mind worked through the dilemma with each step. Move faster, and they risked being heard. Move slower, and the pilot's time dwindled. The jungle punished both. Recklessness meant ambush. Hesitation meant failure. The canopy closed tighter overhead, strangling what little light remained. It was a cathedral of green and shadow, vines dangling like ropes, curling into loops that resembled nooses waiting for necks. Every detail pressed the reminder that they were unwelcome here, intruders moving at the mercy of something greater. Riley felt the weight of it in her chest, the living pressure of a place that demanded silence and patience. Her goggles fogged again, leaving her half blind. She slid them down anyway, choosing blur over nakedness, choosing the discipline of wearing the gear even when it betrayed her. Ahead, the path was nothing but shifting shadows. Each fern, a veil, each tree, a sentinel. She tightened her grip on her rifle. Suppressor, dark against the green. It was not a weapon now, but a promise that if the jungle or its hunters broke the silence, she would answer with quiet fire. The squad slowed to the jungle's pace, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The enemy was out there, somewhere just beyond sight, mirrored in their silence, drawn closer by every sound. The team's survival would not come from speed, nor from firepower, but from respecting the green predator that surrounded them. Riley knew it in her bones as she raised her fist again, halting the file, letting the jungle dictate their rhythm. This was not a battlefield in the traditional sense. It was a place that punished noise and rewarded patience, where every raindrop and insect buzz was louder than human intent. The canopy was both cover and cage, suffocating and concealing at once. Riley accepted it, accepted that their survival depended on moving at the jungle's pace, not their own. She let the rain run down her helmet, dripping steadily onto her gloves. The insects buzzed, louder than breath, louder than fear. Somewhere in the distance, machetes still chopped, voices still murmured, a shadow of pursuit. Riley glanced back once, then forward, and signaled the team on. They melted into the green silence, moving like ghosts beneath the hostile canopy, each step a trespass, each step a risk. The first shot cracked through the canopy like a whip, sharp and close, echoing between trees until it was impossible to know its origin. Riley didn't think. She reacted, diving forward into the mud as rounds tore through wet foliage. Her chest slammed against earth, the breath punched from her lungs, but her hands already had the HK-416 angled up. The suppressor glistened with rain as she found shadows in her scope. The world narrowed to blurred silhouettes moving like ghosts between dripping leaves. Gunfire erupted in bursts, muffled and terrifyingly close. Muzzle flashes stuttered against the jungle's skin, fleeting blinks of orange swallowed instantly by green. Branches snapped overhead, vines lashed wild under the force of rounds. Insects scattered in dense, terrified clouds. It was less a firefight than a convulsion. The jungle itself recoiling, shuddering in response to the violence erupting inside its ribs. Riley pulled the trigger once. The suppressed report was a low cough, lost in the chaos, and a figure stumbled back into foliage with a wet crash. She shifted half an inch to the left, her torn gloves slipping in the mud, the stock slick against her shoulder. Rain dripped endlessly down her rifle barrel, sliding into her scope until the glass fogged, leaving her half blind. She blinked furiously, wiped once with her thumb, and refocused. Another shadow, another squeeze, another figure gone. Around her, the team moved in fractured bursts, seals breaking cover only long enough to fire, then vanishing into trees as if swallowed whole. Their camouflage blended with moss and bark, forms flickering in and out of sight. The enemy mirrored them, moving with the same fractured rhythm. It was predators against predators, circling each other inside a cage made of mud and rain. The air was thick with the stink of churned soil, cordite, and crushed vegetation. Each round split branches into splinters that whipped the air like shrapnel. Vines coiled and snapped back as bodies pushed through them, turning the battlefield into a snarl of green whips and claws. Riley's braid whipped across her cheek in a sudden gust from overhead rotor wash, the Black Hawk orbiting somewhere unseen, and clung to the mud when it fell again. She slid forward, belly scraping moss and wet leaves, her gloves streaked brown and slick. Brass casings ejected from her rifle and vanished into the soft ground, sinking instantly into moss and mud without a sound. Nothing remained of her shots but the brief twitch of foliage and the sickening silence that followed when a voice cut short. The enemy pressed closer. Riley could hear them now. Shouts in a language she didn't speak, guttural and sharp, commanding movements through the chaos. The seals answered with silence, their fire precise and surgical. But there were too many shapes in the trees, too many shadows darting between trunks. Every muzzle flash felt closer than the last. Riley's world narrowed to rhythm breathe, sight, fire. She steadied her scope despite fog and rain, the reticle floating over movement barely distinguishable from dripping leaves. Each squeeze was a choice, a calculation weighed against the risk of missing and giving away her position. Her gloves slipped, mud grinding into cuts along her palms, pain spiking each time she shifted her grip. Still, she held the rifle steady, fingers disciplined, each shot a thread of order in the chaos. The jungle screamed with insects, a rising chorus that swelled louder than the firefight itself. Their buzz vibrated through her helmet, her chest, her bones, a shrill reminder that they were fighting blind inside something greater than them. Bullets cut through leaves overhead, shearing fronds that rained down over her back. Rain continued its relentless dripping, a metronome tapping against her weapon, counting down to something inevitable. A shadow broke left, rushing the flank. Riley pivoted, elbows sinking into sludge, suppressor swinging with her body. She fired twice, each round ripping through the noise. The figure fell hard, tangled in vines, body twitching once before stilling. She stayed trained on it for 3 breaths, then shifted again, eyes searching the maze of dripping trunks. She caught sight of her team in flashes, one seal dragging himself across the mud, rifle angled up, another leaning against a tree, firing controlled bursts before slipping back into cover. They were phantoms, dissolving and reappearing with every heartbeat, every flash of light. The enemy was no different. Both sides bled into the jungle until it became impossible to tell where the forest ended and the fighters began. Branches cracked above her, a sudden cascade of leaves raining down. Riley rolled instinctively, mud coating her braid, rifle snapping upward. A figure dropped through the canopy, machete raised, but she fired first. The suppressed round punched him backward before he hit the ground, the blade clattering beside her in the muck. She stared at it for a beat, the machete that mirrored their own. Both path and risk, tool and weapon, emblem of this fight. The clash raged for minutes that felt like hours, sound bending and breaking, silence filling gaps like water rushing into cracks. Riley's body ached, her arms trembling from the constant strain of firing prone in mud. But discipline anchored her. Fear, tempered by the eerie calm, drilled into every fiber of her training. The jungle wanted to swallow them, but she refused. And then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the fight began to recede. Voices retreated, fewer now, ragged with panic and loss. The shadows thinned, muzzle flashes flickered farther away, then stopped altogether. The insects roared louder, reclaiming dominance over the soundscape, drowning out the last echoes of gunfire. Rain fell steady, endless, cleansing the air of smoke. Riley stayed prone, scope sweeping the green, refusing to believe it was over. Her chest heaved, fogging her lens again, but her fingers stayed tight against the trigger guard, ready for the next shadow. Around her, the seals held their silence, pressed against trunks, crouched low, rifles aimed. No one spoke, no one moved. The jungle itself waited. Finally, Riley eased her breath and let her rifle lower by inches. The mud clung to her gloves, caked under her fingernails, a second skin that stank of blood and soil. She looked down at the brass casings half buried in moss, vanishing into the ground as though the fight had never happened. Temporary, she thought. Always temporary. The jungle gave no victories, only reprieves. What they had survived was not conquest, but survival. Nothing more. She rose slowly, signaling the squad forward with a clenched fist. The canopy loomed above, dripping endlessly, vines swaying like ropes in the aftermath. They would keep moving, because the jungle demanded it. Riley's braid clung wet to her neck, her gloves torn raw, her rifle heavy with mud and water. She felt no triumph. Only the strange calm of one more hour bought inside a living maze that watched and waited, patient as ever. The jungle gave them no warning, only the faintest ghost of white through the dripping green. Riley raised her fist, halting the squad, ahead, tangled in the crown of a strangler fig. Parachute silk sagged heavy with rain. It clung like a wound against the canopy, its folds glowing faintly even in the darkness below the storm. Vulnerability, a beacon. Every enemy eye could find it as easily as theirs. They pushed forward with surgical silence, each step pressed into mud, every breath weighed against noise. Riley's boots sank to the ankles, sucking free with wet gasps, until she knelt in the clearing below the chute. The pilot lay there, half hidden under a thicket of fern and vine, her helmet cracked, one leg twisted badly under her. Her eyes met Riley's, wide and terrified, and the first thing she whispered was not help, but they're close. The words hung in the damp air like a verdict. Riley slid her rifle across her chest, crouching low. She checked the pilot quickly, pulse strong, leg broken. Shock barely kept at bay. Fear radiated from her, clashing with the discipline of soldiers who could afford none. Riley said nothing. She unclipped her own harness and strapped the pilot into it, rope straps biting into her own plate carrier until it burned across her shoulders. Her torn gloves bled as she hauled the straps tight, each tug ripping at open seams already raw from rope descent. The squad formed a perimeter, rifles aimed into the green abyss, silent shadows scanning for threats. Riley lifted the pilot with brutal efficiency, adjusting the weight until it balanced across her body. The pilot gasped, head pressing into Riley's shoulder, breath shallow and quick. Riley's braid plastered against her helmet by rain swung across the woman's face, a human tether binding them together in mud and storm. Then the march began. The jungle resisted every step, a sentient force pulling them back. Vines looped like traps around boots, roots rose like claws from the earth, and branches clawed at rifles until barrels knocked against bark. The ground, already sodden, grew into a swamp with each passing minute, water pooling deeper until boots sloshed instead of stepped. Every movement with the pilot was a test of endurance, her weight shifting, straps biting, breath rattling against Riley's chest. Rain poured endlessly, filling wounds, dripping from helmets into eyes, streaking goggles until they blurred into useless glass. Riley swung her machete in hard arcs, one-handed at times, hacking vines that lashed across their path. Each strike tore skin inside her gloves, blood mixing with mud, every motion a sacrifice paid to move forward. The blade, once tool, became struggle itself, each swing carving a path not only through jungle but through exhaustion. Enemy fire cracked behind them, sudden bursts that shredded foliage. The squad dropped low, rifles barking back in muffled bursts. Gunfire mixed with the slash of machetes. Chaos layered over chaos. Riley pressed the pilot down against a tree trunk, shielding her with her own body, then rose again under the weight, forcing steps deeper into the green. The insects screamed above the fight, their drone shrill, oppressive, mocking. Branches whipped across Riley's face, mud smeared her cheek, water soaked her uniform until it clung heavy as lead. Her braid whipped against her helmet in gusts of wind from unseen air above. Rotor wash faint, circling, waiting. She ground forward, boots dragged by swamp, chest burning. Each step was not triumph but survival, bought with strength she could not spare but gave anyway. The pilot whimpered once, then bit it back, clutching at Riley's plate carrier as if it were anchor and salvation. The straps dug deeper, rope burning into her shoulders, slicing lines of pain that blurred with the rain. Riley leaned forward into it, every tendon in her arms and legs burning, and thought only of distance, one step more, then another, then another. The jungle demanded each like payment, and she paid in silence. The seals hacked into a clearing, machetes ringing like muted bells, the jungle screaming at the intrusion. Gunfire tore through the gap, enemies tightening in the hunt. The squad returned fire, controlled bursts punching shadows out of foliage, muzzles flaring in staccato light. The clearing widened by force of blade and bullet, mud flying, rain hammering down. Survival became a race, the seals holding off the enemy while carving a hole in the predator's ribs. Riley staggered under the pilot's weight, slipping in muck, knees giving for a heartbeat before locking again. Her torn gloves slipped on the wet sling of her rifle, her fingers raw and shaking. Still, she lifted. Still she carried. Still she drove herself forward. She caught sight of her own boots through the slop, scuffed, caked, half swallowed by swamp water. Endurance lived in them, and they kept moving. The pilot's chute still clung high above, glowing faint through the storm, a mark they could not erase, a beacon drawing fire and pursuit. Riley saw it in her mind even as they left it behind, a white wound in the canopy. Vulnerability and warning, reminder that rescue itself was a beacon. Saving one meant exposing all. Gunfire drew closer, enemy shouts clear now, machetes chopping wood in pursuit. Riley's braid whipped across her face as she stumbled into the half-clearing, where her squad hacked space wide enough for extraction. The jungle shrieked with insects, buzzing so loud it drowned even the roar of rifles. Rain fell into every wound, every cut, every open seam. stinging like salt. The pilot whimpered again as a round snapped overhead, leaves exploding around them. Riley's squad dug in at the perimeter, rifles spitting into the dark. She dropped to her knees, pilot cradled in her lap, and hacked one more vine clear with her bloodied glove. Her breath came ragged, helmet dripping steady streams, goggles smeared with mud. She raised her head once, eyes to the canopy, and saw nothing but endless green. Yet the Black Hawk would come. It had to. She had carried the pilot this far. Torn gloves, bleeding palms, rope-burned shoulders. Each step had been sacrifice, each step bought with silence and pain. Rescue was no triumph. It was survival clawed from a jungle that consumed without mercy. Riley stood again, rifle raised one-handed, the pilot strapped against her chest, and signaled the squad to hold. The jungle raged around them, branches tearing, roots pulling, mud swallowing, but still they carved space for hope. Extraction was close now. Too close, perhaps, but still possible. They had not beaten the jungle. No one did. They had only bought one chance, with blood and silence to leave it behind. The Black Hawk's rotors tore the night apart before the bird itself appeared. The roar arrived first, a tremor that rolled through the canopy like a storm ripping through ribs of wood and leaf. Then came the downwash, a violent hammer of air that bent trees to breaking and sent torrents of water sideways. Riley squinted upward through sheets of rain, goggles fogged, helmet rattling from the force. The rope lines spilled down in sudden arcs of white, slapping against trunks, thrashing in the storm like serpents, lifelines, fragile threads of escape. The squad closed in around the clearing they had hacked with blood and blade. Muzzle flashes stitched the green, seal rifles barking in disciplined bursts as they cut down shadows moving in from the tree line. Enemy tracers arced back in lurid red, ripping through the leaves, chewing bark into splinters. The jungle erupted with fury, a strobing battlefield made of lightning, gunfire, and the scream of insects that refused to yield their place in the soundscape. Riley crouched in the mud, the pilot strapped against her chest, both of them shaking in the blast of rotor wash. The pilot whimpered once, her helmet scraping against Riley's plate carrier, voice lost in the storm. Riley bent close, shouting into her ear, though she wasn't sure the words carried, "Hold on." She clipped her own harness into the rope, then linked the pilot's harness to hers. The carabiners shivered under strain, rope fibers already slick with water. Her torn gloves slipped once, nearly losing purchase, before she locked her grip tighter. Pain flared in her palms, raw skin split, blood mixing with rain. But she did not loosen. Up. The crew chief's voice crackled faintly over comms, drowned by thunder. The line jerked upward, hauling Riley and the pilot off the ground. Her boots dragged in the muck before lifting free, slipping from Earth's grip as they rose into the storm. Enemy gunfire intensified immediately, rounds stitching upward through branches, tracers cutting the rain into red shards. Riley clenched the rope with one hand, HK-416 in the other, and angled downward, firing short bursts into muzzle flashes below. The world inverted. She dangled between worlds, the jungle heaving below, the helicopter thrashing above, suspended in a vertical battlefield that made no sense. Vines whipped against her legs, leaves slapped her face, branches clawed at her boots as the canopy tried to drag her back down. Her braid lashed across her helmet, smacking against her cheek in rotor wash. Goggles fogged instantly, vision cut to shapes and bursts of light. Brass casings fell around her, her own and her squad's, tinkling through leaves, lost in mud like rain made of metal. The seals rose alongside her, shadows clutching ropes, bodies swaying in the violent wind. Some fired downward, rifles angled into the green chaos, flashes lighting their helmets in harsh silhouette. Others held only with raw strength, waiting for clearance, trusting their brothers and sisters to cover them. Enemies clawed forward from the tree line, their muzzle flashes strobed against the dripping canopy, red arcs cutting upward like claws. Riley squeezed the trigger again and again, each burst a stitch of survival bought. The pilot pressed against her chest, shaking, breath ragged. Riley felt her hands tighten instinctively, her arms wrapping as if the harness alone was not enough to hold her safe. The rope above groaned under strain, fibers screaming against the pull of storm and machine. It was lifeline, fragile tether, thread of salvation that could fray at any moment. Riley's torn gloves bled freely now, slick red prints left across rope. But she held. She always held. The canopy gave way with a violent surge, branches snapping, vines whipping loose, and suddenly the green abyss yawned below. They rose into open air, jungle stretching out as an endless black sea, treetops trembling under rotor wash. From above, the firefight looked like sparks in a storm, tiny flashes of light swallowed instantly by darkness. But Riley knew each spark was a threat still hunting them, each tracer an arm reaching upward to drag them back down. Rain hammered sideways now, driven by wind, slapping against her faceplate until she turned her head away. Her helmet rattled under debris flung skyward, small shards of wood and stone carried by the storm. Her braid whipped mercilessly, stinging her cheek, but she ignored it, jaw set, focus locked on the rope in her hand and the rifle in the other. One more burst fired downward, one more shadow falling silent in the foliage. The ascent felt endless, measured not in meters but in heartbeats and shots fired. The helicopter thrashed above, a promise of safety that seemed always too far, always just out of reach. Riley's arms shook, tendons burning from holding both weight and weapon, but she refused to let her grip falter. She could feel the pilot trembling against her, feel her shallow breaths against her chest, and each one was another reason to endure. At last, hands reached from the open bay above, hauling the first seals in. Riley swung against the hull, boots scraping metal, weight of pilot and gear nearly tearing her free. She snarled against the strain, forcing her arm upward, one hand after another, until crewmen pulled both women into the belly of the bird. The pilot collapsed against the floor, gasping. Riley rolled beside her, chest heaving, gloves dripping with blood and rain. Below, the jungle roared on. Gunfire still sparked in the trees, tracers chasing upward, insects screaming louder than machines. The helicopter banked hard, pulling away, leaving the canopy thrashing and wounded beneath. Riley lay flat, braid plastered across her helmet, her rifle still clutched tight though her arms trembled with exhaustion. The pilot turned her head, voice raw, barely audible over the roar. I thought the jungle would swallow me alive. Riley said nothing. Her silence was reply enough. Her eyes stayed fixed on the open door, where the green abyss rolled away into night, endless and alive. The jungle was not conquered. It never was. It had merely released them, allowed them to escape with one fragile victory bought in blood, silence, and endurance. Rescue was never conquest. It was survival borrowed on time the jungle could reclaim at will. Riley's gloves bled, her braid whipped, her rifle heavy on her chest. But she breathed steady, eyes forward. They had secured a foothold tonight. Nothing more. The jungle would still be there, waiting, alive, watching.